There's a moment that happens quietly, almost imperceptibly, in the life of a forgotten child. It's the moment when they stop reaching out, when they stop tugging at your sleeve, stop asking questions, stop seeking your approval or your comfort or even your acknowledgement. From the outside, it might look like maturity, like independence, like they've finally learned to stand on their own. But what's really happening beneath the surface is something far more profound and far more tragic. They haven't become independent. They've simply stopped needing you because they've learned that needing you brings nothing but disappointment. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually, like water wearing away stone, through 1,000 small moments of being overlooked, dismissed, or simply not prioritized. And by the time you notice the change, by the time you realize that the child who once desperately wanted your attention has become quiet and distant and self-contained, the damage has already been done. The bridge between you has been quietly dismantled brick by brick through years of benign neglect. And here's the painful truth that many parents don't understand until it's too late. When a forgotten child stops needing you, they're not choosing distance because they're angry or rebellious. They're choosing it because it's the only way they've learned to survive. Think about how a child's mind works in those early years. They're born completely dependent, wired to seek connection as a matter of survival. When a baby cries and a parent responds, the child's brain registers safety. When a toddler falls and looks to their parent for reassurance, and that reassurance comes, trust is built. These aren't just nice moments. They're the foundation of everything. They're how a child learns that the world is a place where their needs matter, where their emotions are valid, where they have worth simply by existing. But when those bids for connection go unanswered, when the child reaches out and finds emptiness, something fundamental begins to shift. The child starts to adapt. At first, they might try harder, cry louder, demand more attention. But when that doesn't work, when the pattern of being overlooked continues, they begin to internalize a devastating lesson. My needs are a burden. I am too much. I should require less. And so they begin the slow process of becoming invisible, not by choice, but by necessity, Tetsi. They learn to stop asking questions because questions go unanswered. They learn to stop sharing excitement because excitement is met with distraction or disinterest. They learn to stop crying because tears are inconvenient. And eventually, they learn to stop needing anything at all. This is what psychologists call emotional self-sufficiency born from neglect. It looks like strength, but it's actually a defense mechanism. The child hasn't stopped needing connection or validation or love. Those needs don't disappear simply because they're unmet. They go underground. The child learns to meet their own emotional needs as best they can, which for a developing mind means suppressing those needs, minimizing them, convincing themselves that what they feel doesn't matter as much as what others need. And in this process of forced self-reliance, something precious is lost. The child loses the ability to trust that others will be there for them. They lose the expectation that relationships can be safe and reciprocal. They lose the belief that they deserve care. When a forgotten child stops needing you, it manifests in specific ways. They stop coming to you with their problems because they've learned that you're too busy, too stressed, too preoccupied to help. They stop sharing their achievements because they've learned that your response will be lukewarm at best, dismissive at worst. They stop seeking your comfort when they're hurt because they've learned that comfort isn't something you provide. They become the child who handles everything alone, who seems remarkably independent for their age, who doesn't cause trouble or demand attention. And parents often praise this. They say things like, "She's so easy," or "He never complains," not realizing that this ease comes at a tremendous cost. What happens inside that child as they stop needing you is both heartbreaking and predictable. Their sense of self-worth begins to erode because self-worth in children is built largely through the mirror of parental attention and affection. When that mirror is absent or clouded, the child can't see themselves clearly. They begin to believe that they're not important enough to be noticed, not interesting enough to be prioritized, not lovable enough to be cherished. These beliefs don't stay confined to childhood. They become the lens through which that child, now grown, views every relationship, every opportunity, every interaction for the rest of their life. The forgotten child who stops needing you often grows into an adult who struggles with intimacy because intimacy requires vulnerability. And vulnerability requires trust that others will respond with care. But that trust was never built. So they keep people at arm's length, appearing self-sufficient and strong, while inside they're starving for the connection they learned to live without. Or they go in the opposite direction, becoming desperate for any scrap of attention, clinging to relationships that are unhealthy because any attention feels better than the neglect they're accustomed to. Both extremes come from the same wound, the wound of learning too early that needing others is dangerous. And here's what makes this particularly insidious. The forgotten child often doesn't even recognize what happened to them as neglect because there was no overt abuse, no dramatic trauma to point to. They tell themselves stories to make sense of their experience. My parents were busy, or they had a lot on their plate, or other kids had it worse. They minimize their own pain because minimizing pain is what they learned to do. But the absence of acknowledgement is its own form of trauma. The wound of invisibility is real even when there are no visible scars. When that child becomes an adult and finally stops needing you completely, when they stop calling, stop visiting, stop reaching out, parents are often bewildered. They ask, "What happened? We gave them everything. We provided for them. Why are they so distant?" But provision isn't presence. Material needs being met doesn't equal emotional needs being met. The child didn't need just food and shelter. They needed to be seen, to be heard, to matter in your eyes. And when that didn't happen consistently, when their emotional world was repeatedly dismissed or ignored, they learned to build their life around the assumption that you wouldn't be there. And eventually, that assumption became their reality. The transformation is complete when the forgotten child no longer feels the absence of your attention as a loss. When your approval or disapproval no longer moves them. When your presence in their life becomes optional rather than essential. This is the final stage of emotional detachment, and it's often irreversible because by the time it happens, the child has spent years, sometimes decades, building a life that doesn't include you in any meaningful way. They've learned to celebrate their victories alone, to comfort themselves through pain, to make decisions without your input. They've become whole without you, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. And the saddest part is that many parents don't realize what they've lost until it's gone. They don't recognize the slow disappearing act of their child until the child is already a stranger. They don't understand that every ignored bid for attention was a test. Will you show up for me? Do I matter to you? Am I worth your time? And every failed test was a brick removed from the bridge between you. By the time the child stops needing you, the bridge is gone entirely. And rebuilding it requires something most people struggle to offer: genuine accountability, consistent effort, and the humility to admit that absence, even unintentional absence, causes real harm. So what happens when the forgotten child stops needing you? They survive. They adapt. They build lives that work around the hole where your presence should have been. They become adults who are often remarkably capable, deeply empathetic to others who feel unseen, and fiercely independent. But they also carry a quiet ache, a loneliness that persists even in crowded rooms, a hesitation to trust that anyone will truly stay. They learn too early that people leave, that needs are burdens, that invisibility is safer than vulnerability. And breaking free from those lessons requires years of conscious work to unlearn what childhood taught them. The forgotten child who stops needing you isn't lost forever, but saving that relationship requires you to do what you didn't do before. Show up consistently, acknowledge the harm caused by your absence, and prove through sustained action that you're willing to be different. Words won't fix this. Apologies without changed behavior are meaningless. What's needed is time, patience, and the recognition that trust, once broken, must be rebuilt slowly and carefully. The child who stopped needing you did so to protect themselves, and they won't risk being hurt again unless you demonstrate that the risk is worth taking. If you were the forgotten child who learned to stop needing, or if you're finally seeing the distance you created, subscribe to Dark Psychology Ascent. We explore the invisible wounds that shape us, the patterns built in silence, the survival mechanisms we mistake for strength. Understanding what happened is the first step to healing it. You deserve to be seen then. You deserve to understand yourself now. Subscribe and start the journey.